A few weeks ago, I managed to catch a cable rerun of The Godfather with my father, and I noticed something that stopped me cold. A shot, then another, then a sequence. Suddenly, images from Led Zeppelin's film started appearing in my mind. The lighting, the pacing, the legacy. I knew from Zeppelin's movie poster there was an obvious Godfather vibe, and the bandmates had matching outfits at one point. But a question emerged. What if The Song Remains the Same was influenced by The Godfather in ways nobody talks about? My father, or as New Yorkers say, my father, was born in 1941. Part of what is often called the silent generation. Like many of his peers, he always regarded The Godfather as more than a film. To him, it was a story about family, responsibility, tradition, and the inevitable passage of time. Growing up, we shared countless moments in front of a television screen. We followed The Sopranos when it premiered in 1999. I even had a Nintendo 64, just like AJ. Yet no matter how much I enjoyed newer stories, my father always told me the same thing. Son, you've got to watch The Godfather one day, and please take out the trash next Tuesday. As a late teenager, I rented the trilogy, and the first film left a lasting impression on me like my old Zeppelin VHS, when I decided I wanted to play like Jimmy Page. So in this video essay, we'll compare both films, examining their visual language, their symbolism, and the fascinating parallels between Michael Corleone's rise and Jimmy Page's command of Led Zeppelin's empire. Also, I'll try to answer a question that has lingered for decades. What is The Song Remains the Same really about? Because Led Zeppelin believed in America. America had made their fortune, and just like the Corleone family, what we see on screen may represent the culmination of a remarkable period when four musicians, their manager, and their inner circle operated not merely as a band, but as a family. And if all of this still sounds completely crazy, there's one final coincidence. During one of the New York sequences filmed for The Song Remains the Same, a theater marquee can be briefly seen in the background. The movie playing? The Godfather, Part 2. Led Zeppelin's film opens with one of the most famous or infamous sequences for a rock movie. Manager Peter Grant, tour manager Richard Cole, and their driver set out on a mysterious business meeting. Immediately the imagery feels familiar. A motor car to the left, sharp-dressed man to the right. It echoes a visual composition seen in The Godfather during Michael Corleone's time in Italy. Movement becomes the next connection. In both films, men leave headquarters and set out toward an uncertain destination. The camera remains locked onto vintage automobiles crossing the landscape, creating a sense of purpose before a single word is spoken. Just like the Hollywood director at his mansion, we see another one in the British countryside, both places of defining conflict, one involving a horse, the other a shootout to get a message across. But hey, Tom Hagen tried to reach an amicable agreement, but he was dismissed. Action soon follows. While The Song Remains the Same presents its gunfire sequence almost as fantasy, both films use sudden violence to raise the stakes. The worlds are different, but the cinematic language feels remarkably similar. Inside, the resemblance becomes even more striking. Shadows dominate the frame, faces emerge from darkness. The use of chiaroscuro photography creates tension before decisions are made. Money, strategy, and power hang silently in the air. A direct reference to Jimmy Page's obsession of light and shade in music. These interior sets mirror each other in style, a time and place where ambition and fate play a game of cards, not revealing their hand at once. Just like tension in music, crescendo, resolution, a grand finale, or coda. The roads themselves become characters. Highways, distant skylines, and long stretches of concrete connect both stories to a larger world beyond the immediate action. Whether in New York or on the approach to Pittsburgh, the imagery possesses a timeless quality. America, the land of opportunity. References to New York area bridges, both Queensboro in The Godfather and Triborough in The Song Remains the Same, speak of city trails, continuity, a plot in motion, driving the viewer into the immersive nature of the story. The visual parallels continue. Michael Corleone walking over the hills and far away in Sicily. Robert Plant and his family in the Welsh countryside. Outdoors, away from the pressures of cities and conflict. Jimmy Page ascending through the Scottish Highlands. Different locations, yet both films repeatedly associate their protagonists with journeys through landscapes that feel almost mythological. Perhaps the most fascinating comparison involves business itself. One of The Song Remains the Same's most memorable scenes shows Peter Grant confronting a local promoter over the alleged sale of bootleg merchandise. The atmosphere is tense but controlled. Everyone in the room understands who is in charge. Led Zeppelin's lawyer was there too, which brings the inevitable comparison to Tom Hagen. Yet both sequences revolve around authority being established and boundaries being drawn. Powerful men surrounded by trusted associates, decisions being made, messages being delivered. And then comes the ending. The Godfather closes with Michael Corleone assuming control of the family empire. The door closes. Silence takes over. In The Song Remains the Same, Peter Grant checks the aftermath of a successful operation. The rivals have been dealt with. Business has been concluded. 2 films, 2 worlds, 1 final image of power, fade to black. Okay, now let's look at the timeline. The Godfather arrived at cinemas on March 24th, 1972. All 4 Led Zeppelin bandmates were off the road at the time, taking a break after the Australasian tour just before resuming recording sessions for their 5th album, so they had plenty of time to catch the film in England. What followed was nothing short of a cultural phenomenon. Produced for roughly $6 million, the film generated hundreds of millions in revenue worldwide, won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and quickly became one of the defining films of its generation. To call it influential would be an understatement. Everybody knew The Godfather. Fast forward to July 1973. Led Zeppelin arrived in New York City at the height of their powers. Their North American tour had broken attendance records, generated enormous publicity, and firmly established them as the biggest rock band in America. To document the occasion, the group chose to film their final 3 concerts at Madison Square Garden. Now, the location itself is interesting. For all practical purposes, both stories now occupy the same universe. New York City, the city of The Godfather, the city that never sleeps, the city where reputations were made and fortunes were won. Zeppelin's movie crew shot B-roll stuff in several nearby areas, which underlined the Big Apple feel and the Godfather-ish setting. Yes, $200,000 were stolen from their hotel, but it sure made for movie material. Whoever took the money remains a mystery to this day. In October 1973, as production of The Godfather Part 2 was getting underway, Led Zeppelin began filming additional material back home in the United Kingdom. Rather than release a straightforward concert film, the band wanted to combine live performances with offstage sequences. The original director for Led Zeppelin's movie was replaced in early 1974 after the band realized the carefully recorded audio tracks didn't match the concert footage. There were serious gaps that had to be filled out somehow. A second director, Peter Clifton, joined the project and suggested Led Zeppelin mime portions of their performances in a British soundstage. You can check more about these controversial sessions here on the channel. More exterior fantasy sequences were conceived and filmed around the time The Godfather 2 was finished. Among the proposed additions was the mobster-inspired opening shot at 3 locations. Peter Grant's house in East Sussex had the perfect Corleone vibes for what they were aiming for. Driving scenes were shot in the surrounding areas. The indoor set was carefully worked in pre-production, including makeup and special effects for this scene. Its location remains a mystery, but it points to somewhere in London. No member of Led Zeppelin nor the film crew has ever publicly stated that The Godfather influenced these scenes. There is no interview, no production note, and no direct testimony linking the 2 projects, yet the timing is difficult to ignore. Whether the cinematographer, director, editors, or the band themselves, I believe there had to be some Francis Ford Coppola influence going on to make The Song Remains the Same what it is. By the time The Godfather Part 2 premiered in December 1974, Zeppelin's movie was still deep in the editing process, with New York footage continuing to play an important role in its overall presentation. You can check my separate episode for a detailed breakdown of those B-roll sequences. Then came February 1975. Led Zeppelin released Physical Graffiti, an album whose cover was rooted in New York imagery. Whether by coincidence or design, New York continued to occupy a prominent place in the band's visual identity during the very years The Song Remains the Same was being assembled. Zeppelin's Concert and Beyond film premiered in October 1976, scoring huge box office and album soundtrack numbers, despite the heavy criticism by cinema experts on the meaning of it all. Both Godfather 1 movie poster and Zeppelin's imagery looked similar, a black background with an iconic lettering. Beneath the concerts, the fantasy and all, there may have been a deeper story hiding in plain sight. To understand that story, we need to examine the men at the center of both worlds. Michael Corleone didn't seem like the obvious successor to his father's business. The famous line, "I never wanted this for you," exemplifies the family's perception of the Michael we see at the beginning of the film. Well-spoken, somewhat shy, and away from the business and spotlight of, say, his louder brother, Santino, the enforcer. But Michael did not only rose to the occasion, he raised the stakes of the organization in the process. He was given control, and we discovered a side of him nobody saw coming. It was much the same with James Patrick Page. During the 1960s, Jimmy Page built a reputation as one of Britain's most in-demand studio musicians. Reliability was everything. He arrived prepared, delivered results, and earned the trust of powerful players in the industry. Like Michael Corleone before his rise, he seemed happy operating with someone else's organization, quietly learning how the game was played. The Yardbirds were a popular British band who rivaled the Rolling Stones in touring activity. Eric Clapton was a founding member and left in 1965. Then came Jeff Beck, and the lineup was complete. In 1966, the Yardbirds bass player quit, and who joined? Yes, Jimmy Page on bass. By 1968, Jeff Beck was no longer in the band. Page was now into a lead guitar position under new management, violin bow included. From the outside, it didn't seem possible that he would surpass the success of peers like Hendrix, Clapton, Beck, Richards, Alvin Lee, or rising star Ritchie Blackmore. Page paid close attention to what everyone in the business was doing, good and bad. The silent architect awaited his turn to truly shine. He studied the business carefully, waiting for the right moment to carry out his own vision. When that opportunity arrived, he helped revolutionize rock production, particularly the sound of the drums. The Yardbirds' former manager later suggested that Page could be difficult to work with at times. Perhaps that was because he refused to play the little games of the business and knew what he wanted from the start. Page's career appeared to stumble when the Yardbirds disbanded in July 1968, but their new manager, Peter Grant, was a lot like Tom Hagen, a trusted consigliere who believed in Jimmy and whose tough London street-smart upbringing made him sort of a Vito Corleone figure who would protect Page. He saw enormous potential in him, and together their network of connections would change the course of rock history. It didn't hurt that Peter Grant could make offers people couldn't refuse either. Just like Michael Corleone, Jimmy Page responded to uncertainty with boldness. Rather than searching for safety, he doubled down on taking chances, personally financing the recording sessions for Led Zeppelin's debut from a position of strength and great money management. In many ways, this was Jimmy's restaurant moment, the point of no return, the moment when the quiet observer stopped reaching to events and began shaping them. Fast forward to November 1968. He shopped Led Zeppelin's debut to several British record labels. Then he went with Peter Grant on a trip to America with the same mission: find the best record deal. Page signed an unprecedented deal for his new band before Led Zeppelin had ever played a single show in the United States. Page received full creative control as producer, an advance approaching $250,000, and the authority to replace band members if they stood in the way of business. He became general manager and owner. The contract was to expire in 1971, but was extended to Halloween 1973. No other rock and roll band of his generation received such a generous record deal. Not even these guys, nor these guys. To a degree, they were untouchable and became the envy of many, including journalists, concert promoters, and some colleagues. The quiet session musician was now leading his own organization. Led Zeppelin became a family. What is The Song Remains the Same really about? It's a metaphor for life in the music business, juxtaposed against the invaluable grounding force of family. Unlike most rock films of its era, Led Zeppelin chose not to focus solely on life on stage. Instead, they deliberately showed the quieter moments away from the spotlight, suggesting that commitment to one another and to their families mattered just as much as the music itself. The band's members rarely socialized once they returned home from touring, each retreating to different parts of the UK until the next telegram arrived announcing another journey across America. The film reflects that reality. The fantasy sequences work almost like personal retrospectives, revealing the identity each member brought into Led Zeppelin back in 1968. Robert Plant is a restless traveler, forever searching for something beyond the horizon, much like the spirit captured in the lyrics for Ramble On. John Bonham is the mighty engine, the driving force whose explosive drumming powered the band from its earliest days, when he occasionally drove the group's van during their first tours. John Paul Jones is the quiet architect, moving in the shadows through harmony and arrangements, always dependable, always prepared. Jimmy Page is the dreamer, the man who was born to become a guitar legend and lead his band like a sonic wizard. The concert footage reveals the substance and talent behind the hype. Not only could they back it up from every angle, they could sustain it with a chemistry that could only exist because they had complete control over their business. Jimmy Page occupies a role similar to Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 2. He knows the game inside and out. He breathes total confidence, and his thought process enters a state of flow, while the family as a whole delivers iconic performances that would never be repeated. There are Michael Corleone and Tom Hagen qualities in John Paul Jones's virtuosic command of feel and musical structure. There is early Vito Corleone and Santino power in John Bonham's heavy-handed drum attack, making his Ludwig kit an offer it couldn't refuse, nor do anything but get hit. And then there's more Santino power in Robert Plant's imposing stage presence, natural charisma, and commanding vocals. Of course, Led Zeppelin would face challenges far beyond the sunset we see in 1973. Few could have predicted the tragedies that would later strike the family, who ventured into business for themselves as a record label in 1974. In many ways, the band entered its own Godfather Part 2 chapter with the launch of Swan Song Records, establishing themselves as equal business partners while taking on a fatherly role for new bands such as Bad Company, who would go on to generate millions of dollars for the label. The Swan Song years were Led Zeppelin learning what it truly meant to be superstars under their new status. The most troubling aspect of their film remains its opening sequence, as it mirrors the unfortunate decline of their latter-day management style, judging by Peter Grant's own admission in his autobiography. If this was Grant's fantasy sequence, then like The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, it reminds us there is another side to power nobody prepares you for. Beyond strength and dominance, the game changes as you become wealthier, much like Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 3. Led Zeppelin remains one of the very few, and let me underline that, very few bands that escape being ripped off by the music industry. And the opening scenes almost feel like a celebration of that achievement. Yet the deeper you dive into their story, the more it transforms into a fascinating question. In December 1980, they made a decision almost unheard of for a band of their stature. They walked away. No replacement drummer. No attempt to preserve their empire at any cost. And yet, in 2007, they officially reunited as Led Zeppelin for a very special reason. A one-off show to honor their dear friend, Ahmet Ertegun. And who was called in to complete the lineup? Family, of course. John Bonham's son, powerhouse drummer Jason. A magical evening, full circle. Above all, there was no Fredo in this family.